Cal can use several lightsaber stances in Jedi Survivor, including shaming himself with something as uncivilized as a blaster. As you can only have 2 of the 5 stances equipped at once, I thought it would be fun to do an overview of each of the stances, their strengths, weaknesses, and talk generally about what's best. Let's go. Let me know in the comments what your favorite stance is. So first, let's start with the single blade. Now, this is the most basic vanilla stance, and it has an average power, speed, range, and defense, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is bad. So it's, I guess, general best strength is that it's just a consistent average performer for the average Joe lightsaber user. You know, if you want to live out your Luke fantasies, then you definitely can with this blade. The weakness is that there isn't really any special skills. A lot of the other stances, especially some of the more unique ones, have some really special and fancy looking skills, but the single blade is just pretty basic and vanilla with its sort of skills and overall design. But I like vanilla ice cream, right? Don't get me wrong, but sometimes, I like a little cookie in there. So maybe some of the other stances might be better. I like a cookie. But the best skills here really is the twofold reflection, where you split a blaster bolt that you reflect into 2 different blaster bolts, and something like dash strike, where you just dash forward and strike. Because of its sort of basicness, the one thing it really has going for it is that its skills are actually cheaper in cost compared to some of the newer stances. Both the double bladed and the single have this same, where a lot of their, if you invest all into their skill tree, it actually costs less than some of the other trees. So that is a positive, and it is really good in any scenario. I wouldn't necessarily say that you'll go wrong if you're using the single bladed lightsaber. You're absolutely not. You're not really going wrong with any of the stances, but it's definitely one that I prefer the least because of the fact that there's nothing really special about the fact that you're just using one lightsaber and its skills, you know what I mean? The double bladed lightsaber is to live out your mole fantasies. It has the second lowest power of the different stances, including range as well. It's got a slightly higher speed than the single blade and the second highest defense of the stances. Its big strength is exactly the same as in Jedi Fallen Order, and that is its potential in big group encounters and the ability to do AoE damage. This has been buffed even further with some of the new skills like the Endless Hurricane, where you can just kind of spin around constantly and attack everything that's around you, and as long as you don't take damage, you're just going to use this attack consistently. I also like the Repulsive Burst, where you slam your fist into the ground, and Rising Storm, where you jump up in the air and suck the enemies in close as well. And it's all of the skills like this that are all based around that group encounters and using this stance in a group environment. And because of that, its weakness really is its single target, and high stamina or high HP enemies, it really struggles with that because of its not necessarily ability to do high amounts of damage with its individual attacks on a single target. It's definitely not its strength. It's more about that AoE control and pushing enemies away from you and hitting multiple enemies at once. So it is best used in those environments, in those group encounters, and it's definitely a blade that I would have, say, as a secondary, if you're using something like, say, the single or the Crossguard or something like that as your primary to deal with single targets, you've got the double blade as a backup to deal with those AoE group environments as well. So it definitely has value for those. The dual wield is my personal favorite.
This is where the fun begins.
Now, this has average power very similar to the single blade. It has the highest speed of all the stances, but it does have the lowest range and lowest defense. The big strength here is that it has fast, agile attacks, and you're using both of those blades to attack enemies. You can have a little bit of AoE with this weapon as well because of the fact that you're swinging these both blades around you, in front of you and behind you, so you will do a bit of AoE, but it's also good for single target because of that. The big weakness here is that it is an offensive focused stance, and some of the animations will lock you into the attack. You can break out of that by blocking, but that doesn't always save you, especially against those red unblockable attacks. And because of the low range as well, you have to be nice and close to enemies, so you have a lower reaction time for some of that in some environments against the bigger creatures. So there is weaknesses to this, but it is a very good stance that I personally prefer. Now, the best skills here is probably split reflection, which we've talked about for the twofold reflection with the single. You've also got focused parry, but into the precision release is probably the best. So when you use that Y attack with the dual wield, where you essentially enter a phase where you automatically parry anything that comes towards you, with precision release, if you release it right at the time you get attacked, you do this little stagger animation that deals heaps of damage to all the enemies sort of in an AoE around you. So you've got that potential as well in in those group environments when you're being attacked. Now, this is best used in any real scenario. I've been using this as my standard stance, like the one that I'll mostly use, because you've got that AoE potential with things like precision release and some of its overall attacks, as well as good against single target because of those fast, agile attacks, and you can sort of dodge out the way and then follow up with your own attacks. I really like the dual wield, and it's got a lot going for it in its skills, definitely. Blaster stance is next. Now, the blaster stance has the lowest power of all the stances. It does have the second highest speed, but it also has the highest range and an average defense. That highest range is because of the blaster, right? Because you can actually shoot from range. This is an amazing stance, and it sort of has like a fencing style with its general saber attacks. One of the big weaknesses for this stance is its overall low power, and it's not great against large groups because of that fencing style. It's really succeeds in a single target environment, especially against bosses and enemies that have stamina, where you can apply constant pressure to that stamina bar, having them block your blaster shots, which will then reduce their stamina bar. Then you can follow up with just general attacks and break that stamina bar for easy hits. It's a really good, like, constant pressure sort of boss stance that I definitely like. The blaster is a little weak in its skills as well. There's probably two good ones, like quick draw, which is like a dead eye effect, and point blank, where just before you get hit, if you press Y to use your blaster, you'll like blast the enemy away from you. And the rest are really just about reducing the cooldown on your blast or increasing your amount of shots. So it's a little weak in the skills department. It's definitely weak in its power department and its AoE, but if you're looking for a single target, like boss focused stance, it's really good in those environments, and it definitely has something going for it. The Crossguard is the last stance. Now, this has the highest power. It also has the highest defense, but because of that, it has the lowest speed and the second highest range. So this stance really is an immense damage focused stance that has really good range, and you can like cut through enemy shields with this, and it's a very strong stance, but it has that very slow attack speed, and it's got a very different rhythm to the other sabers because of this. Like, you can kind of switch between the other four stances, and their speed difference isn't that drastic, whereas the Crossguard is significantly slower, and it has a different rhythm that you can take a little while to kind of get used to in those environments. I really like the impact and greater impact skills, like the shockwave that you do on the ground. The other skills in this line are also really powerful and strong as well. It's really great as a primary saber option if you want to have some sort of a two-handed heavy playstyle, which is something that was severely lacking in Jedi Fallen Order, and it's definitely here. You can play as that sort of slower two-handed heavy playstyle because of the different way that this weapon works. And it's good for single target because of those heavy hitting attacks. It's also good for groups because of that ability, like impact and greater impact, to deal that shockwave effect on the ground. And you've also got like that sweep attack as well. There is value in either of those scenarios, so it's a really good like primary stance to use in those cases. So which stance is best? And well, they're all designed here to have a trade-off, like a strength and a weakness, as we've kind of discussed here. And I personally really like the blaster stance because of the ranged pressure and its sort of uniqueness for those single target fights. But I've seen some people say that they don't really like it because it doesn't really make sense that, you know, a Jedi's using blaster, whatever. But I think you can really succeed with any of the 5 stances. I like the dual wield and then comboing that with, say, a blaster stance or the crossguard stance. But you could also do something like, hey, have a crossguards for a single target and then something like the double bladed for AoE. Finding a balance between these stances and 2 stances that complement each other should be your primary focus. But my rough ranking of these stances, based on nothing but my own opinion, is probably dual wield at the top, and then blaster, crossguard, double bladed, and then that poor single stance at the very bottom. But let me know your ranking and which stances you're using down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.